It was a humid July evening in Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of summer night where the air clung to your skin like an unwanted secret. Daniel Miller sat in his truck outside his home, the engine humming softly as he watched the warm glow of the porch light filter through the screen door. He had been sitting there for nearly 10 minutes, trying to gather the will to step inside. Something felt off. It had felt off for weeks now, maybe months, but tonight the unease pulsed in his chest like a second heartbeat. His wife, Lauren, had changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but in ways that were impossible to ignore once you started paying attention. She used to greet him at the door with a quick kiss, her laugh bubbling like music when he teased her about whatever show she was binge-watching on Netflix. Lately, though, she seemed distracted. Her smile was still there, but it no longer reached her eyes. She had excuses for everything. Late nights at work, book club meetings that ran long, a sudden interest in yoga classes across town. The changes were subtle, but to Daniel, they were deafening. When he finally pushed open the door, the smell of dinner, something with garlic and butter, floated through the air. Lauren was in the kitchen, moving with a calm efficiency that looked almost rehearsed. She wore a sundress, light blue with little white flowers, the kind she usually saved for special outings. For a moment, Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her, and a flicker of memory washed over him. The first time he saw her at a coffee shop near UNC Charlotte, her hair falling over her shoulder as she studied for her nursing exams. She had looked up at him with those same green eyes, and he had thought, this is it. This is the girl. "Hey, you're late," Lauren said, without turning around. Her voice was even, but there was a sharpness beneath it. "Traffic," Daniel lied. In truth, he had left work on time. He had driven around aimlessly for an hour, trying to make sense of the heaviness that sat in his gut every time he thought about her. They ate in near silence, the clinking of forks against plates filling the spaces where conversation used to live. Daniel tried to ask about her day, but her answers were clipped, distracted, as if her mind was somewhere else. When she excused herself to take a phone call in the other room, his heart gave a painful lurch. He caught just enough of her voice to know she wasn't talking to her sister, like she claimed. Her tone was softer, more intimate, threaded with a laugh he hadn't heard in months. That night, when Lauren fell asleep beside him, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in lazy circles. His mind replayed every detail, the way she guarded her phone, the sudden burst of new lingerie she claimed was on sale, the way she had started wearing perfume even on grocery runs. He wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but the signs were too clear. Something was happening, and he was losing her. Over the next week, Daniel began to notice things he had ignored before. A faint cologne on her clothes that wasn't his. Receipts crumpled in her purse from restaurants he had never been to. A text message notification that flashed across her phone one morning, "Can't stop thinking about last night," before she snatched it up and locked the screen with trembling fingers. Charlotte was a city that thrived on appearances, well-manicured lawns, neighbors who waved politely, the unspoken rule that problems stay behind closed doors. But Daniel felt like he was walking through a play, everyone else sticking to their roles while his world tilted dangerously out of script. One evening, he decided to test her. "We should go out this weekend," he said casually as they washed dishes together. "Maybe drive up to Asheville, spend some time in the mountains. Just the two of us, like we used to." Lauren froze for just a second, her hand tightening on the sponge. Then she forced a smile. "This weekend? I can't. I already made plans with Jenna. Girls' trip." Daniel nodded, pretending to accept it, but inside something hardened. He knew Jenna, Lauren's oldest friend, married with 2 kids, the kind of woman who never left her suburban bubble. A spontaneous trip? No. It didn't fit. That Friday, after kissing her goodbye and watching her drive off in her silver SUV, Daniel followed. His palms were slick on the steering wheel, his stomach knotted with dread and adrenaline. He kept his distance, careful not to draw attention, until she pulled into a hotel off I-77. A mid-range place, nothing fancy, the kind of hotel used by traveling salesmen and people who didn't want to be seen. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs as he watched her step out of the car. She smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the window, and then hurried inside. A few minutes later, another car pulled up, a sleek black sedan. A man in his late 30s got out, tall, confident, with the kind of easy charm Daniel recognized instantly. He didn't just walk into the hotel. He strode, like a man who knew exactly what waited for him inside. Daniel gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The betrayal was no longer suspicion, it was fact, undeniable and suffocating. His wife was cheating on him. He stayed there for hours, waiting, his mind a battlefield of rage and heartbreak. When Lauren finally emerged, her hair slightly tousled, her smile wide in a way it hadn't been with him in years, Daniel felt something inside him fracture. She climbed into her car, humming along to the radio as if she hadn't just shattered their marriage behind those walls. He didn't confront her that night. Instead, he lay awake again, staring at the ceiling fan, but now the silence was different. Now it burned. The next morning, over coffee, Lauren acted as if nothing had happened. She teased him about leaving dirty socks on the floor, laughed at a joke on her phone, kissed him lightly on the cheek before heading out to run errands. And Daniel, sitting there with the taste of bile in his throat, realized that the woman he had loved for 15 years was living a double life. But if she thought he would stay blind forever, she was wrong. Daniel began to live two lives. By day, he went to work at the construction firm where he managed crews and projects across Mecklenburg County. He wore his hard hat, reviewed blueprints, barked orders when deadlines loomed. To anyone who passed him in the office, he looked the same, steady, dependable, a man who kept things under control. But beneath that surface, another version of him stirred restlessly, alert to every inconsistency in his wife's story, every flicker of guilt that flashed across her face. He became an observer in his own home. When Lauren texted in the kitchen, he noted the quick tilt of the phone screen away from him. When she left for yoga, he checked the clock, memorizing the time she left and returned. He studied receipts in her purse, scanning for dates, addresses, details that didn't fit the narrative she fed him. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was evidence gathering. One evening, after she fell asleep, he crept downstairs and opened her laptop. Lauren rarely used it, preferring her phone, but Daniel knew she kept certain files there. He scrolled through emails, browser history, anything that might confirm what he already knew. Most of it was clean, too clean. Almost as if she had been careful. But then he found a hidden folder buried inside her documents. Password protected. His hands trembled as he tried her birthday. Nothing. Their anniversary. Nothing. Finally, on the third attempt, he typed the name Ethan. The folder opened. Inside were screenshots of text messages, hotel receipts, and a few candid photos, Lauren smiling at dinner with the man from the hotel, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The dates went back nearly 6 months. 6 months of lies, of whispered phone calls, of stolen hours in the city he thought he knew. Daniel stared at the screen until his vision blurred. He closed the laptop slowly, his mind reeling with questions. Who was Ethan? Where had she met him? Why hadn't he noticed sooner? But another question pressed harder, darker, what was he going to do now? The next day, he began watching her more carefully than ever. He tracked her movements, followed her once or twice under the excuse of running errands. He learned Ethan's car, his routine. The man worked in real estate, smooth talker, expensive suits, always on his phone. Daniel even visited Ethan's company website, scrolling through his photo, his polished smile, his biography about helping families find their dream homes. The irony made Daniel sick. The more he learned, the more dangerous the knowledge became. His anger was no longer a raw, shapeless thing. It was sharp, controlled, waiting for the right moment to cut. One Sunday, Lauren announced she was going to visit her sister in Raleigh for the day. Daniel nodded, pretending not to care, but when she left, he followed at a distance. Sure enough, she didn't take the interstate east. She drove north, straight toward Lake Norman. Daniel parked a few cars back as she pulled into a lakeside rental property. Ethan was already there, leaning casually against his car, his smile wide when she stepped out. They kissed openly, like teenagers drunk on forbidden love. Daniel's stomach turned, but he forced himself to stay hidden. He watched them carry groceries inside, laughing, their hands brushing. It was a picnic, a lover's getaway, a stolen Sunday that should have belonged to him. He stayed for hours, long enough to see them lounging on the deck with wine glasses, Lauren's head resting on Ethan's shoulder. She looked younger, lighter, like the woman Daniel had fallen in love with all those years ago. Except that version of her no longer belonged to him. That night, back home, Daniel felt the weight of betrayal settle deeper into his bones. He poured himself a whiskey and stared out the window at the quiet Charlotte Street. Neighbors walked their dogs, porch lights flicked on, children's laughter echoed faintly down the block. It was the same street he had lived on for 10 years, but it looked different now. Artificial. Hollow. When Lauren came through the door, smiling like nothing had happened, he almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he kissed her cheek, murmured a soft, "How was Raleigh?" and watched as she lied effortlessly, weaving details about her sister's new kitchen renovation. It was then that Daniel decided he couldn't just wait for the truth to unravel on its own. He would force it into the light. Over the next week, he quietly prepared. He printed the photos, the receipts, the text screenshots he had found. He placed them in a manila folder and locked it in his truck. He bought a small voice recorder and slipped it into his pocket, testing it during lunch breaks. He practiced questions in his head, imagining her reactions, imagining the way her face might crack when she realized he knew everything. But the more he planned, the more another thought crept in: was exposing her enough? Divorce would end things, yes. But was that justice? Was that punishment for the months of deceit, for the way she had looked at another man with the love that once belonged to him? Daniel wrestled with the anger nightly, lying awake beside her as she slept peacefully, her hand occasionally brushing his in unconscious familiarity. He wondered if she ever felt guilt, or if the thrill of betrayal had buried it completely. Then, one Friday night, he caught his chance. Lauren claimed she was heading to a late yoga session. Daniel followed discreetly, parking across the street as she pulled into a downtown restaurant instead. Ethan was already there, waiting. They embraced, kissed quickly, then disappeared inside. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. He grabbed his phone, snapping photos from the car. Proof, more proof. He could walk in right now, slam the folder on the table, watch her crumble. But instead, he stayed in the shadows, rage curdling into something colder. Something patient. When she came home that night, cheeks flushed, she crawled into bed beside him, murmuring about how exhausting her yoga class had been. Daniel nodded, pulled her close, and whispered, "I love you." The words tasted like poison, but he said them anyway. Because the longer he waited, the sharper his revenge would be. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Daniel had planned it carefully, every detail rehearsed in his mind until it became second nature. He knew Lauren's patterns now, the rhythm of her lies. Tuesday nights were always the same. She claimed to have a book club across town, but in reality, it was dinner with Ethan. He had tracked her enough times to be certain. That evening, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the manila folder in front of him. The house was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. He didn't pour himself a drink this time. He wanted his mind sharp, steady. He wanted to remember every detail. At exactly 9:42 p.m., Lauren walked through the door, her hair slightly tousled, her lips tinted a shade of red she never wore for him anymore. She froze when she saw him sitting there, waiting. "You're up late," she said cautiously, setting her purse down on the counter. Daniel studied her, silent, until the weight of his gaze made her shift uncomfortably. Then he slid the folder across the table. "Open it." Her brows knit together, but she obeyed. The moment her eyes landed on the contents, photos, receipts, texts, her face drained of color. She flipped through the pages with trembling fingers, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Finally, she whispered, "Daniel. I don't lie to me," he cut in, his voice low but sharp. "Not anymore. I know everything. The hotels, the dinners, the Sunday at Lake Norman. Him." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. She dropped the folder, the papers scattering across the table like shattered glass. "I never meant for this to happen," she choked out. "I didn't plan it, I swear. It just happened." Daniel laughed bitterly. 6 months of lies, just happened. Sneaking around, telling me you were with your sister, your friends, your yoga class, that wasn't an accident, Lauren. That was a choice. Every single time, it was a choice. She reached for him across the table, but he pulled his hand back as if her touch burned. "Daniel, please. I still love you. I do. I was just lost. I felt invisible. You were always working, always tired, and Ethan, he made me feel alive again." The name was a knife. Daniel clenched his jaw, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "Alive? You needed him to feel alive? What about me? What about everything we built together? 15 years, Lauren. Was that worth nothing?" Her tears spilled over, streaking her cheeks. "It wasn't nothing. I swear. I never stopped caring about you. She broke off, sobbing. "I made a mistake." Daniel stood, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He paced the room, his hands raking through his hair. The sight of her crying, broken, might have softened him once. But now, it only fueled the fire in his chest. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," he said coldly. "A mistake is burning dinner. This." He gestured at the folder, the damning evidence strewn across their kitchen. "This is betrayal. This is you tearing our life apart piece by piece and smiling in my face while you did it." Lauren buried her face in her hands. "Please, Daniel. Don't leave me. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can." He cut her off with a sharp laugh. "Counseling? You think sitting in a room with some stranger is going to erase him from your bed? From your heart?" Her sobs grew louder, desperate. "I'll end it. I'll never see him again. Just give me another chance. Please." Daniel stared at her, the woman he had once loved so fiercely, the woman who had been his partner, his best friend, his everything. But now, all he saw was a stranger who had chosen another man over him. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward. "You ended this marriage the moment you let him touch you. The moment you lied to me. There is no fixing this." Lauren shook her head, her voice cracking. "So what, then? You'll just throw it all away? 15 years, just like that?" Daniel's voice was quiet, deadly calm. "You already did." He left her there, sobbing at the kitchen table, and walked upstairs. He didn't sleep that night, but he felt a strange clarity, as if a storm inside him had finally broken. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, while Lauren was still asleep, he called a divorce attorney. He explained everything, his voice steady, his resolve unshakable. By noon, the process had begun. But Daniel wasn't finished. Divorce would end the marriage, yes, but it wasn't enough. Ethan had stolen something from him too, and Daniel couldn't let that slide. Over the following days, he gathered information. Ethan's clients, his reputation, his carefully polished image in Charlotte's competitive real estate world. Daniel began to make quiet phone calls, share anonymous tips, spread whispers about Ethan's unprofessional conduct. He sent the incriminating photos to Ethan's office email, addressed to his boss. He created cracks in the man's perfect facade, watching from the shadows as his rival's career began to tremble. At home, Lauren tried to apologize, tried to reach him, but Daniel kept his distance. He spoke only when necessary, his tone flat, his eyes cold. Each day, she looked smaller, more fragile, as the weight of her choices bore down on her. Daniel didn't gloat, didn't shout. His revenge was quiet, deliberate, precise. And it was only the beginning.